key criticism of the ISC. It was less that than the fact that when it came to China, the intelligence agencies were focused on, shall we say, classic espionage threats, insufficiently focused on the exercise of covert influence through activities that, on the face of it, appeared legitimate.
And a shocking new report leads the news today from MPs and peers. It says that China has mounted a prolific and aggressive campaign to infiltrate the British Secret Services. The Intelligence and Security Committee, it says that the campaign has touched every part of the British economy, nuclear energy, universities, politicians and the military, all targeted. After taking 4 years, carefully putting the report together, the committee says that what it has heard amounts to a whole-state assault by China. Nigel Inkster is a senior advisor on China for the International Institute for Strategic Security and worked for 31 years inside the Secret Intelligence Services. Nigel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is a horrifying report, isn't it? Do you agree with its conclusions?
Broadly, yes, but I don't think it's quite as horrifying as you suggest. I mean, those of us who have been following these issues closely find very little in there that is new or surprising. It has long been the case that China has adopted an all of state, indeed all of nation approach to issues such as intelligence collection and the exercise of influence. And the extent to which this is apparent has magnified over time as China has become more economically successful and more globally powerful. So in essence, there is no big surprise here. I think also the fact that this report took so long to compile and took so long before it was published slightly fails to reflect the extent, inevitably fails to reflect the extent to which things have moved on, in particular two important pieces of legislation which the government introduced. One, the National Security Investment Act, which gives the British government the right to intervene in business activities such as mergers and acquisitions in designated economic areas where there is a national security imperative. And the other, which just came out 3 days ago, which came into law 3 days ago, is the National Security Act, which significantly revises the Official Secrets Act, long regarded as unfit for purpose, and contains within it some provisions, including an offence of acting as a covert agent for any nation, not just an enemy nation, but also mandating the creation of a national influence register. So anyone who is actually working or seeking to exercise influence on behalf of a foreign government is required to register.
Yes, I saw.
These things have changed, for the better. There's obviously a lot more to do, and I think where the ISC report does make a very powerful and important point is still the absence of a sufficiently clear and unequivocal government strategy for dealing with China, and the fact that a lot of the responsibility for managing this very complex and difficult relationship is fragmented between lots of different departments and agencies, many of whom really lack the knowledge and expertise effectively to deal with it.
Yes, one doesn't want to over-horror it, but it did feel, despite all of the improvements which you rightly mention, that it is something which needs saying. There is a sense in some quarters that we've been a bit complacent about China for too long, and a suggestion that the intelligence services, which of course you've been involved, were over-focused on Islamism and therefore simply couldn't look sideways, couldn't look eastwards often enough at what was going on.
Yeah, well, I think that is a slightly unfair characterization. I remember when I, when I was director of operations in 2005, 2006, I came under very significant pressure to stop doing everything else and focus all the resources we had on transnational Islamist terrorism. I refused to do so. We maintained, I regarded it as vital that the service maintain expertise in certain areas, China being one, because the point is once you lose it, you lose something really valuable, and it's hard to build it back. But when it comes to, I think, the key criticism of the ISC, it was less that than the fact that when it came to China, the intelligence agencies were focused on, shall we say, classic espionage threats, insufficiently focused on the exercise of covert influence through activities that, on the face of it, appeared legitimate.
Let's,
But
can we just speak about what might rectify this? Because we've got a whole culture and systems invasion, everything from, children's toys with sort of internet access and all the rest of it. A great deal of this is individual companies, isn't it? And it's individual businesses and it's individual universities. Quite difficult for a government to say, hang on, resist this, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to do.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think when you've got dealing with a phenomenon as large and pervasive as China, you have to prioritize. You have to accept that you can't deal with everything, and therefore you have to identify what really matters most in terms of national security and focus on that. And this is, I think, about effective government guidance, effective coordination in implementation. I mentioned the National Security Act and this register of interest. It's all very well having this, but unless it is systematically and energetically policed, it's really not going to have much in the way of effect. And I think there do have to be clearer lines of command within government as to who is responsible for what.
Who should be then? Where would you put those?
Well, I think it has to be at the centre. The guidance needs to come from the top. It's very, very difficult to do. I mean, let's be honest. Bureaucracies are by definition obtuse, and don't find it easy to exercise the kind of nuanced approach that is actually required here. So I think there has to be very, very clear central guidance. And some sort of mechanism probably situated at the centre within the Cabinet Office that kind of oversees and guides the national effort.
The matter of China, yes. And just, we must pause in a moment, but just very briefly, this isn't unique to Britain, is it? There must be other countries having exactly the same problem in exactly the same way.
Every country on the planet that isn't China is facing this challenge, including the United States of America. Indeed, the ISC report makes the point that the United Kingdom is not a top-tier target for the Chinese intelligence services. It's probably at the top of the second tier. But if you look at the difficulties the United States faces dealing with Chinese intelligence challenge, you look at some European countries, Italy, for example, Belgium, relatively speaking, we're getting off lightly.
Nigel Inkster, thank you very much for joining us. That was fascinating.